The round of applause, the speech, usually there's 3 moments when you get up like I just did, and the first round of applause represents faith, and during the speech, the second round of applause represents hope, and the end of the speech, the applause represents charity. So we'll get going here. Now, I do have some slides I'll show you. Graphic slides I have removed. Okay, I do have them.
Do you want this pointer?
Yeah, that'd be good. I do have them. I do have the graphic slides, but I removed them for obvious reasons. I don't want you to lose your lunch. In order for, we're going to discuss 2 forms of anesthesia: general anesthesia, which is where you're out, and block anesthesia, in which we interrupt the electrical transmission across wires that in biology you call nerves, and you'll see why. In order for me to tell you, explain this to you, I have to acquaint you with anesthesia. If it were surgery, I wouldn't have to do this. You know what surgery is. You take a knife, you cut someone open, you put something in, you take something out, you repair something, and you sew them up and go home. It's not anesthesia. You'd think that it's, well, just put you to sleep. I suggest to you that if you go to sleep, have someone put a knife to you, you won't be asleep long. Okay? So, let me add this final prelude. Anesthesia, of all the areas of medicine, orthopedic surgery, neurosurgery, on and on, anesthesia is the only branch of medicine created by Americans, developed by America. It is the only branch of medicine that has done this. It is the only branch of medicine that was killed by the American courts, and it is the only branch of medicine that was resurrected as a result of war by the United States Army. Hate to say it, you know, and then modified by the United States Marine Corps. So with that, let's begin. In the 1700s, and I'm not old enough to remember it, but I read it. But in the 1700s, Priestley and others discovered that we live in a sea, just like the fishes, except the sea to us is gas. 79% oxygen, 79% nitrogen, and 19% oxygen, with trace gases making up the difference, like carbon dioxide. Okay. To give you an idea of what things were like, in about 1803, John Adams, one of the founders of the country, his daughter had breast cancer. His daughter's name was Abigail, same as her mother, and they called her Nabby. And John and his wife, sitting in the main warehouse, Benjamin Rush, Dr. Rush, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, came to the house with 2 strong men that went to the room and held Abby down with John and his wife, listening to the screams as Rush applied the knife to remove a breast cancer. She survived the surgery. She did die of the breast cancer. Then the next step I want to take you to is what happened in the early 1800s. A nice lady like Denise Weiland, middle upper class lady, would be having a party. Dinner party. She was going to invite the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and the banker. and she wanted to provide some entertainment. So instead of getting a violin, she'd do something different. Denise would go out and she'd hire a chemist. He'd come to the home with gases and have the people breathe the gas. And when they breathe the gas, they go nuts. You know, delusion, hallucination, bounce around the room. And some people got hurt. W.T.G. Morton in the North noted that they didn't remember it. And they claimed they felt no pain. Morton convinced John Warren at Massachusetts General to let him give diethyl ether. He gave diethyl ether for the removal of a mass to Gilbert Abbott. It was a success, no pain, and so forth. Wow. The operating room where this was done at Mass General has been set as a national shrine in the United States. You can go to Mass General and go to that room and see it. But remember, anesthesia is the United States. So that's in the north. South of the Mason-Dixon line, the same thing was noted at Crawford Lawn, and in Statuary Hall, where each state can put two of its most famous people. Georgia has put a statue of Crawford Lawn. Now, I'm going to take you to Hannah Greener. Before we get to that, Hannah Greener was a 15-year-old girl. She had an ingrown toenail, 1850. She didn't want any anesthesia. Her mother wanted her to have anesthesia. She didn't want her daughter hurting. And Hannah was a good girl and took the anesthesia. The case was reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And in that report is a description of this 15-year-old girl dying an anesthetic death. So you have to remember, as a general rule, accidents in surgery will result in maiming and not commonly killing. Accidents in anesthesia usually result in death. They either, if you have respiratory obstruction, on room air, the brain will flatline in about 3 minutes. On oxygen, the brain will flatline in about 5 minutes. If you throw up under anesthesia, the stuff you smell is butyric acid with some hydrochloric acid. You will have a massive lung burn. That's Mendelssohn syndrome, and about 80% death rate in 2 to 3 days. So now you understand that what we're dealing with, and that's the reason I gave you that case. Morton went on to provide anesthesia services in Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, and the Wilderness in the Civil War. The next phase occurred in the last half of the 1800s with kitchen surgery. What they would do on the Great Plains is they would scrub your kitchen down, and whoever was going to have the surgery would lay down on the table, and someone like Henry Mayo, you know, the Mayo Clinic, would come out with his sons, Charlie and Will. Charlie, 10 years old, would pour the ether. Okay? And Charlie and Will set up the Mayo Clinic, and they felt that anesthesia was a mechanical thing. You breathe it in, you breathe it out. No reason to have physicians. And and they started nurse anesthesia. In 1918, the whole thing flared. A Mayo-trained nurse was sued for practicing medicine without a medical license. And we went to the court. Is anesthesia a medical practice? And the court held that it was not a medical practice. The court also raised the issue of whether the women had the sensitivities to be able to give anesthesia. It shows you a sign of the times. And anesthesia after that basically died in America as a medical practice. Okay? In 1938, pentothal came out. And the reason for the pentothal is breathing ether is obnoxious, and it takes a while to take them down. Young people that you talk to who have never heard of doing it, I'm old enough so that I did do it. And I can recall one case in which they put a knife to a knee and the patient jumped up and started running around the room with the operating crew in hot pursuit to try to get him back on the table. And so we do the pentothal. Wears off in 10 minutes, but in the meanwhile, you give them the anesthetic. The Japanese in 1941, as you know, bombed Pearl Harbor. And the Surgeon General at Tripler was told by the Army to go around and teach the handling of mass bombing casualties. When he was asked, what do you think of pentothal, ether, so forth, he said that's the ideal drug of choice for euthanasia. He said that those drugs killed more Americans than Japanese bombs. Now, the people that came out of World War II were old enough, they were my teachers, and that's where I heard the stories. The United States Army realized that this was intolerable. And so they looked around the country for an anesthesiologist that could take this thing. And there were very few anesthesiologists. It was dead. They found a fellow named James Tavell and asked him if he'd come in the service and fix it. And he agreed to do it. And in there's a thing called Compendium of Surgery in World War II. Tavell wrote the story. He said that he thought the Army would make him a captain when he came in or something like that. They didn't. They made him a major. The Army understood what rank meant in the Army, and they wanted to give him authority. About 1 year later, he was Lieutenant Colonel James Tavell. And he fixed it by a very simple process. He took people who were surgeons, partially trained surgeons, and he said, you're an anesthesiologist. And they said, no, nurses do that. He said, no. See what's on my shoulder? You'll do what I tell you to do. And these people developed anesthesia. And they came out of it, and they went to the universities and set up the programs in anesthesia. That was a resurrection. By 1967, when I came along, 65, there were only about 8,000 anesthesiologists in America. That's all there were. Anesthesia did not pay very much. It was listed, for example, by the California Medical Association as an economically depressed medical specialty. And a lot of doctors looked down on us, saying we weren't really doctors and so forth. My brother had told me to join the Navy. He said it would be the best home he ever had. He was on the Bonhomme Richard in the Second World War, in the battles in the Pacific. And he loved the Navy. He'd come in his home, there was this big picture of a ship. It was the Bonhomme Richard. I joined the Navy, and they said to me, where do you want to go in the Navy? I said, Vietnam's heating up. They said, yeah. I said, send me there. insanity runs in the family, I guess. So I thought I'd be, a shed, nice bed, so on and so forth, good food. And I got my orders. I was 1st Marine Division in Vietnam. So, let's see where we go. What had happened in Vietnam is that the Navy at San Diego had a fellow named John McCrae. McCrae was, I never met him, but I knew of him. He was kind of a foul-mouthed character, but he was an outstanding anesthesiologist, very competent, very brilliant, and a great teacher. And the Navy ordered him to go to Vietnam and set up anesthesia for the Marine Corps. And he set the following principles. 1, all anesthesia was going to be delivered by physician-trained anesthesiologists. 2, triage would be conducted in a manner that if blocks could be done, it would be done that way. I think you can understand why. After I told you about Hannah Green, with the block, you would be numb from the waist down, but your laryngeal reflex was intact. The airway was not a problem. You could breathe. You just had arms and legs that were numb. And most battlefield casualties are extremity casualties. So if we had 4 operating rooms, 3 would be triaged as block anesthesia. So you had to learn to be pretty skillful to pick up where the nerves were and know the anatomy so that you could produce block anesthesia. That was John McCrae. Now when I arrived in Vietnam, do you want to take the next one? This was, there was Chiu-Lai. It was like a lovely resort. I mean, the blue sea, the South China Sea was the bluest blue I ever saw in my life. And you see the little basket boat out there with the basket boat fishermen. Those of you in Vietnam remember the basket boat fishermen. Absolutely lovely. Next slide. Let's see. These are must units. They are just blown up. And you can blow them up anywhere, and you've got an operating room. And they're pretty decent, really, and they work pretty well. Next one, go to the next. We would take care of kids, take care of China, the Vietnamese also. And this kid's, if I can remember, I think his father was killed by the Viet Cong because he was working with the Americans, and he was also wounded. But he survived it. We operated on him and treated him and so on, and he was fine. And you'll see more of this in a minute. And of course, the famous outhouse and back. So you'll notice when you go to the outhouse, the burnout, in front of you, you could sit there and watch the South China Sea with a nice view while you're on the, And there'd be like, for those of you who don't know, there'd be a can underneath partially filled with kerosene, and you'd pull it out and light the stuff and burn everything up. And there'd be a 2-wheeler or a 3-wheeler, So you're used to really getting to know your buddies sitting on the job, and you get so used to it. When I came back to America and had to go to John, I asked my wife if she'd come in and keep me company. And maybe that's the reason she divorced me. Next one. As we see, we would drink a little bit, and I lost my hair on one of those parties. Next line. And the inside, take the next slide also. As you see, typical men's bachelor mess and so forth. I was always that way. Karen. Next one. This is, I believe, Da Nang. You can see the Southeast Asia hut. Next line. Go to the next one. And in Da Nang, they would have Marine Corps band play for us at lunch. Except for people getting shot up and things like this, it wasn't bad. Next slide. Now, there's a reason I show this, because all of you know what that is. You've been on a rifle range and so forth. I tell you that because I want to tell you about this. You know, with the Marine Corps, if we were off the base, we had to carry the weapon we were issued. And when we came in, we had to clear the weapon. And so I take the 1911, take the clip out, open the action. And some Marine was on the line. He was close enough to see my collar devices, so he knew who I was. He hit the ground with both hands over his head, yelling, "My God, it's a doctor with a gun! It's a doctor with a gun!" So I show this slide to tell you, doctors can shoot guns. Okay? Now move to the next one, and go to the next one. Okay, I want you to notice that helicopter up there. That guy had to be either an idiot or the bravest man you'll ever meet. Think of it. He's downrange of a group of doctors shooting guns. Okay? Had to be the bravest guy you'll ever know. Move on. Okay, keep going. Okay, now here's where the trouble begins. Some of you are from the CBs, some of you are from CBs. The CBs set up an airfield at Dong Ha, 8 miles south of the demilitarized zone. And we put in a medical unit about a mile north of the demilitarized zone. The North Vietnamese acquired 152 artillery. That's our version of the 155. It could reach 8 miles. And when you're at the limit of the trajectory of an artillery round, you're going to have a certain number of short rounds, of which Delta Med received the short rounds. Okay. So the Marine Corps figured logically they've got to move the airfield and the medical unit. So they decided to build it at Quang Tri, 21 miles south of the demilitarized zone. And to do that, they wanted to reinforce the 3rd Marine Division. The 3rd Marine Division's TOR went from High Van Pass north to the Z, and the 1st Marine Division was from Chulai north to the High Van Pass. So they're going to build a unit at Quang Tri, and they wanted to reinforce the 3rd Marine Division, so they took the 26th Marines from the 1st Marine Division and brought them up to the 3rd Marine Division. Now, every regiment in the Marine Corps has a C&C company, a medical unit that's doctors, nurses, not nurses, but corpsmen and so forth. And I was part of the C&C attached to the 26th Marines, and so I was supposed to go north. Now the problem starts. The 1st Medical Battalion, which had the C&Cs that I was a part of, was commanded by Clinton Lowry. And the 3rd Medical Battalion was commanded by Robert Brown. Brown was a guy who really, he was a little crazy in some respects, and I can tell you that later, but he was a guy who really cared for Marines. And I got along with him. Some people didn't because he was a little wild. But he was a guy that really cared for Marines. He'd pop up in the 3rd Marine Division, you don't know where, and this guy'd be there. He knew everything that was going on. In the South, there was Clinton Lowry. I feel that Clinton's goal in life, I think, was a star. In any event, I don't know if this is going to be published, but, maybe he's alive. I think what he was, he would not allow, he did not want us to be incorporated into the third Marine Division's TOR. Now think of that. You've got a unit in the TOR, but they're not a part of the TOR. So you're going to have a unit with no support. And they put us up north doing nothing while this battle between Lowry and Brown went on. Lowry prevailed. And so we wound up outside of Plane Tree at an old French fort of Louvain. And you can see this is Louvain. Each of us had a hole in the ground, a foxhole or fighting hole in the ground. It had been overrun twice by the North Vietnamese Army. And, you know, some of this you scratch your head because you ever try to, each of us assigned a hole, you ever trying to find your hole in the ground at night with no moon, okay? Then we didn't even have a piss tube, you know. We had no support. And eventually we did get one. And you'd think they would put the tube like in back of one of those buildings or something like that. They put it in back of the foxhole, and in front of you is an anti-personnel mines. If I can, let's see if I can point to it. No, I didn't want to do that. Okay, go back one more. They put a little luminescent paint ring around the fist tube. Now stop to think about it, okay? Nobody was going to use it. You couldn't find the black tube, and now with the ring around it, you could find it. They could hear the tinkle and aim for the white ring, okay? And they'd find you in the morning holding out to you know what, with a hole in your head. Nobody would use it. Military, you know? We didn't have a burnout. And so the guys went to the Seabees and said to the Royal Navy, let us take a 6x and don't register it, and we'll steal the burnout and bring you back your CD and we'll know the better, there's no trace. And said Howell was a nice guy. He said, okay, go ahead. Well, he took the 6x out, loaded the 6x, loaded the burnout out to the 6x at the middle of the night after curfew, and they got stuck in the mud, and the MPs came down the road. But I think the MPs understood because the next thing I knew in the morning, there was a burnout. But there were problems. Go to the next slide. You can see the buildings here, which had been overrun by the North Vietnamese. You'll notice there's no doors, there's no windows. Go to the next one also. Now there was a Buddhist temple on one side and a church on the other, and this Jew was in the middle. So, you know. Now, you see, if you look at this, you can see how primitive it is. There's a view box up there, and there's a microscope over there. Very primitive. Go to the next one. And more examples of how primitive it was. There's a wash basin so you can scrub your hands before you operated and so on. Go to the next one. They actually have the Marine Corps birthday up there. And it's always amazing to me that in the middle of London, in the worst situation at all, they got a cake. They actually had a cake and a whole celebration for the Marine Corps birthday, no matter what. Go to the next one. And then go on. This is all part of the Marine Corps birthday. And there's a general, the Vietnamese general is giving them an award and so on. And then go to the next slide. And here are the girls, and go to the next slide. And you see they're giving them a lei. At any event, what happened next was that the medicine coming out of there had its problems. And as I told you about Brown, Brown was very devoted to the Marine Corps. And he would get on every plane in Fubai that was sending Marines out and check them to be sure they were stable and that they'd be okay. And if necessary, he'd pull them off the plane. He told me, he was the one who told me this. He kept a list of these problems. And came the day he walked into 3rd Math in Da Nang with his list. He put it on a desk, and he told them that either Lowry's unit amalgamated under his command, his TLR, or he was going to take that list and pass it out to every reporter between Fubai and Da Nang. He said to him, and as for my career, you can shove it up your ass. That was Brown. And the next thing I knew, I was packed up and moved to Delta Med at Dong Ha. And at Dong Ha, here's what you had. You had some very outstanding people. The surgeon that we had at Lavang had 1 year of training. It wasn't good. And we were working a bombed out building and so on. Here, you had, for example, you had the fellow standing up who was Merrill Compton, who was the commanding officer. He was an outstanding, fully trained orthopedic surgeon. In the back, standing up with the white t-shirt on, was Jim Finnegan. Finnegan had completed 3 years of surgery, and in the surgery programs, when you reach the 4th year, you should be able to take care of everything and anything, or you won't be there. And he was a very competent surgeon. He wound up ultimately as the commanding officer at Quezon, and he did the surgery at Quezon. He was a marvelous guy. We had general surgeons who were also fully trained, internists, sitting down with his head kind of bowed down is Terry Andrews, who was an excellent internist, who was sitting on the only flush john in I-Corps where the rounds started cutting in, and he had to make a decision, and he decided to go for the bunker. With his pants around his ankles, he walked across the sidewalk. As he leaned down to get into the bunker where he was sitting, a round hit, and the shockwave hit him in the butt, and he flew into the bunker. I didn't see him for some time, and I said to my friend Ralph, I said, Ralph, I haven't seen Terry around. He said, well, don't you remember when he got hit in the butt with the shockwave? I says, yeah. He says, well, it kind of screwed his head up a little bit, so they sent him home. I cleaned his language up. So they had a very good crew, and move forward, if you will. Go play football on the airfield, move forward. And this is me standing on the road. As you can see, Dong Ha, Hanoi is about 582 kilometers away. Next round. That's me also. Next one. Here they're bringing people in. We were flying 34s when the Army was flying Hueys. You should know that a 34 is a good aircraft, but it's a piston-driven aircraft. The Hueys that the Army flew were turboprops. Next one. Now here's a triage area. Okay, and you can see if you look at the primitive situation that you had at Lavang, look at this. It is much more organized, it's all there, and so on. Very well done. Next slide. And here's more, bringing in more wounded in or taking out. Next slide. Now, it's a sniper dog, and we treated the dogs, as far as we were concerned, they're just another Marine, and we took care of them the same way. And there's Mel Compton. The dog is being treated by a board-certified orthopedic surgeon. Okay, next slide. And you can see the handler there patting the dog and so forth. Next slide. And there's the same thing. You can see the handler. Next slide. Now, this is a prisoner of war. I don't know why they put the thing on the head so he won't see or whatever. Ed Moore, who belonged here, is a dear friend and so forth. Ed liked the following story, which is a true story. We had a prisoner of war come in, and he had what we call multiple dings, and he had shrapnel wounds in the groin. And they weren't deep, superficial, and what you have to do with those is to clean it up real good and then debride the wound. And so the corpsman, of course, I put a spinal in so he would be numb from the waist down. And he's numb from the waist down, but he's awake. So remember, there's no laryngeal problem, there's no airway problem, he's awake. And I don't speak Vietnamese. The corpsman, he doesn't speak Vietnamese. The guy on the table, he doesn't speak English. And the corpsman has washed his hands nice and clean, put on a nice pair of sterile gloves like he was taught, and he goes over and he's got to shave and scrub the area. He's got a straight razor in one hand, and he takes the guy's pride and joy in his other hand. This guy's eyes got big as I swear he must have been saying to himself, Ho Chi Minh, don't lie, these Americans are barbarians, you know? And the corpsman looked at me and he knew what was happening, and he just shrugged his shoulders. What was he supposed to do? And he proceeded, as nice as can be as he was taught, to clean, shave the area, and the surgeon stepped over. This North Vietnamese prisoner, I think, must have been amazed that he came out completely intact. And that was one of them. We had another situation, move forward, that's him. Move next, move to the next one. Now you can see what happened is we would take care of local people that had been hurt. Here's a father, his son, and the kids on the table, and we take care of them, period. And some of this presents into some interesting problems because we, of course, never take any money, but the families felt they owed us, and so they'd invite us to dinner. Every unit had its scarf. The guy would eat anything. And we had a guy up here named Dave Farber. And we would send Dave out to go and do the eating and so forth. And so it came the day when we had one of these come up, and we had an intelligence officer came in, and he said, Dave, can I go with you to that family so I can practice my Vietnamese? Dave says, sure. So they take off. They come back, Dave is red-faced, angry, just really upset, and this intelligence officer is green. And we said, Dave, what happened? And he starts describing what to him was this beautiful dinner the lady laid out. I mean, we're going. And he says, and we walk out of the house, and never, he said, have I been so embarrassed. This jackass, this jerk, vomited all over the vegetable garden. So, what you gonna do? Here's the operating room, and you can see the difference from November. How neat it is, how clean, how well set up it is. Next slide. This is an example of block anesthesia. If you look up under the guy's armpit, you'll see a very small needle stuck in that nerve. That's the bundle of nerves that controls your whole upper extremity. You shoot local into there, and the arm will go dead, depending on the local, for 3 to 5 hours. It'll go stone dead. You can cut it off, you can do anything you want. That guy will not feel it, and at the same time, he is wide awake. He's breathing fine as can be, and he's not going to throw up. If he does throw up, he's got a laryngeal reflex, he'll spit it out, and the safety margin is enormous. You got a question?
5 minutes, 5 more minutes?
Yeah, I'm almost done. Yeah, that's okay, I don't mind that. My wife usually gives me less than that. So, you know, and, this is an example of spinal anesthesia. They had the guy leaning forward, and they put the needle in and so on. Next slide. There's a little kid that hurt. Next slide. Now the big guy that was standing there, and I'm going to conclude with this, is Ralph Cadger. Cadger is about 6'3", 6'4", and strong as an ox. I mean, really, I've seen him pick up one of these refrigerators that are this big. I've seen him pick it up like a toy. He had as I told you, with anesthesia, it was all nurse anesthesia. There was only 8,000 of us in America at the time. And the only job he could get as a fully trained anesthesiologist was on a cardiac service in a Detroit hospital in the middle of the night. That's the only job he could get. And so he was doing a lot of cardiac work. They brought a guy in who was young surgeons. That's what we had. We didn't know what was wrong with the guy. And Cadger walked over, took one look, and said, he's got a cardiac tamponade. Cardiac tamponade, the heart sits in a sac called the pericardium. If you get a little ding in that sac and it bleeds, the blood will fill the sac and the heart can't move. You will die. Cadger came over and said it's a cardiac tamponade. Surgeon says, who are you telling what it is and where it is and so on? He said to him, Ralph was known as a violent drunk. I love the guy. He was a great guy, really good guy, and he really cared for Marines. He said to this guy, listen, you, etc., etc., either you operate, I'm going to freaking kill you. And he took this guy into the operating room, and he talked the guy through surgery for a cardiac tamponade. You make an incision under the 12th rib, go in, grab the pericardium, you cut a piece out, suck the blood out, burn anything to stop any bleeding, go home. And now with no blood in the sac, the heart's doing this. If they would have taken the guy to the ship by the time they took him to the ship, he would have been dead. The press got a hold of it, and I was up talking to the XO in Dong. I said, is that true about Ralph? And he said, yeah. He says, that's what happened. He says, the public relations people for the Marine Corps found out about it. They had things all over the place about cardiac surgery in Vietnam, and they took the surgeon and brought him back to his hometown to have a Howie something or other day. He says, and the guy's back there with the Howie something day, and there's Ralph, was sloshed in the corner as usual. So this is some of what was done, and I want to thank you for the opportunity. Us married men don't get to talk much, so I thank you very much.
All right, let's take some questions.
Yeah.
All right, we will have time for a couple questions.
John.
So let's start over here.
When you talk about Brown stopping them from putting the guys on the planes going back, I might have missed it. Had a lot of guys already perished that had gone that shouldn't have made the trip, or?
No, I really don't think so. I think that there would have been more trouble. For example, we had one guy that had he'd come in with this is an example, the guy didn't wind up on the plane, but there were events which Brown picked up. For example, in this case, he'd had a small vein in the carotid artery. We sent him back to gross registration, he's dead. They sent him back, they said he's not dead. We sent him back, they said he's not dead. We said he's dead, they said he's dumbass, obese, the goddamn guy's alive, and so on. And we found he had a small hole in the carotid artery. Finnegan, who used to put his finger in, he couldn't close it, he wasn't trained well enough. So he put his finger in the back to hold him. I put a tube in the windpipe, flew to the ship, and they got him off, and there was a new pilot in the country, put the plane down wrong. I tried to get off, and I nearly fell off the aircraft as he lifted the whole thing, and I'm 20 floors up and hanging half in and half out of a helicopter and so on. So I always tell people, take my advice, if you fly in helicopters, stay inside. But we have events, something like that occurring, and those that Brown got a hold of, he'd take care of. So pretty much, I don't think we had, there were some of these that did go south like that, but pretty much Brown was the force that pretty well took care of things. Brown was a tough-ass guy. I mean, he'd fly in out of Quezon, and when it's going on, he'd fly in to see what's going on. And he said to one guy, the story I heard was, he said to one guy, go out and get a so-and-so. He said, Commander, they're dropping 1,300 rounds a day out there. Brown pulled a pistol and said, we're going to die here or there. The little crazy guy.
Right here, Doc.
Yeah, Dr. Gunn, that's wonderful report. I flew a lot of people into Charlie Bed. There was no Delta Bed when I operated at Don Hock. But I wanted you to compare the facilities on a hospital ship like the proposed to what you had at Delta Med.
Okay, it didn't match up. It was not supposed to match up. That's the reason for the ship. The Delta Med was a frontline situation. All we had was orthopedic surgery and general surgery and anesthesia. On the other hand, the ship had neurosurgery, orthopedics, it had the whole gamut up and down the line. So when we saw something that was beyond our abilities, the thing was to get the chopper, and out to the ship we'd go. And so the ship was absolutely great, and so on. I don't know if you're the one that talked about it, Ed Feldman. You know about Feldman. Well, we called him Fast Eddie. I told you why, because they had a thing where you could take the doctor on land and have him spend 2 weeks on the ship, and the guy on the ship would take his place on land. They cut it out when they realized the guy on land could get killed. But at any rate, they sent Eddie out to the ship for 2 weeks, supposedly. And the next thing we knew, it was about less than a week, and Eddie was coming back. That's how we called him. He said, gee, Ed's coming back fast. He became known as Fast Eddie. Well, you have to understand there wasn't one homosexual bone in Eddie's body. And there were nurses on the ship. They were all there in the nurses' quarters and had a mini court martial and just kicked them off the ship. I mean, the guy had a Navy Cross. I mean, you're not going to get he was the guy that stuck his hand in the guy with a live grenade and pitched it, and that was Eddie. So he got the Navy Cross for it, and so you can imagine they're not going to be too hard on a guy like that. Anything else?
before we wrap this part up. All right.
How about Dene, the NSA Dene, Navy Hospital? You were there also?
No, I was not part of it. The Navy hospital was more of a rear echelon situation. They had the world, and then where I was at was the frontline situation of big stuff, not the general medical officer. We were the front line of the guy who's got the carotid artery going, the cardiac tamponade going, this type of thing. We were into the big stuff and had to make the decision about going to the ship.
Dr. Ben, your support out in the field, your corpsmen or medics, how were they trained? Did you train them? How professional were they?
No. What the Navy did is they set it up with us with no nurses. It was all corpsmen. I'm sorry for the Army guys, but I think there's a reason for it. When we would have an Army corpsman come over, I was used to the Navy corpsman. You really have to watch the Army corpsman because, we were in a critical situation and they weren't trained up to that measure, period, as opposed to the Navy corpsman. And you have to understand that what the Navy was doing is they were taking the upper echelon of the boot class, and they were the corpsmen. But the Navy had a different problem than the Army. You couldn't put a doctor on every ship at sea. So and sometimes if you've been in a rough sea, I think the Navy guys will agree with me, there's sometimes you can't get off that goddamn ship. You can't get anything in there either. And so what are they going to do? So they trained the corpsmen to be able to really be able to handle things really pretty well. Later on in the war, I think the quality of the Navy corpsmen got less because the Navy realized they were killing off the upper echelon of that boot class, and they didn't want to do that. But the Navy corpsmen, as I saw them, they could match up pretty close to physicians. They were really very good. They're outstanding.
All right, let's wrap this up. Vice President Michelle, Dr. Ben,